Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Bob Unger Show, and we have a very special guest, a woman who can actually think. That's a godsend right there because all I see lately is emotion from women and men, like Don Lemon, who uh, who I never saw anyone so irrational and emotional. And she is a director of the campaign of a gentleman named VIVEK Ramaswamy. I got that one right. Phonics work for me. And she is, as you can see, a Black lady who also ran for the Senate and ran as a conservative, which, one of the things we'll discuss is that, I spent a lot of time in Black churches. I've spoken there. I used to be a professional singer. I've sung in Black churches. And it amazes me how these leftists get away with getting the Black vote when, in fact, the morals that they stand for are the exact opposite of what most Blacks who have been churched in any way would think. And yet they continue to support those pushing the whole immoral agenda on not only the white population, but the Black population as well. And Kathy, I give us a little background of how you got to where you are. Have you always had the position you have now, or did you have some kind of a spiritual epiphany that woke you up?
Yeah, well, I grew up in the very deep south of Alabama, and like most good Southern girls, everybody goes to church every Sunday. You're in church every Wednesday night, and every time the revivals come around for the week-long revivals, you were there, sitting as close as you could to the front of the pulpit. So there I was. So like most people, I too was going to church, and those values that you spoke about, it is very true. It is truly a disconnect in the way most Black people are raised, tending to lean a little bit more conservative in our values. And yet you see the co-opting of our vote and our voice by the left. And you would think we espouse this transgender cult that we see, or this climate change cult that we see going on around us. And most Black people, if you actually sat down and talked to them and asked them about the nuances of the things that the left are espousing, they would say no, that they vehemently disagree. And yet we see that they're, typically vote 92, 95% Democrat. And I too was a Democrat, right? I often say I was born into the Democrat Party, just like I was born into brown skin. I don't recall a conversation about it. I don't recall anyone delineating why or why not we vote one party versus another. I'm Black and I just voted Democrat. And it wasn't until I was a junior in college, and my major was then finance, corporate finance. And I don't know, I had an epiphany. I wanted to help out in a campaign, and I went to the first Democrat office I saw. I don't know why. We vote Democrat. And so I just walked into this man's office, and I'm sitting down in front of him saying I want to help with his campaign. And as he was talking to me, I began to have an epiphany. And the question was, do you even know what he believes? Do you even know if what he believes is what you believe? And it truly was as simple as that, a seed that was sowed that caused me to begin to think, well, what does he believe? And how does what he believe actually show up in the community in which I live in? Because this was an already elected official that I was sitting across from. And then I just began to pay attention, to money, how money is created, the flow of money, the various issues, political issues. At the age of, I don't know, 2021, I started downloading what was being passed in the House and the Senate at the federal level and reading what the bill actually said versus what those who are espousing these particular policies were saying in the Democrat Party, and then comparing it to how these things were actually showing up in the communities in which I lived on. So from the time that I was a junior in college to the time that I changed my voter registration from Democrat to Republican, it wasn't that long of a spread between the two. So I've been a Republican, voting Republican for a couple of decades now, and have no intentions of ever going back to that plantation, as we call it.
Yeah, that certainly is a plantation, no question about it. And there's a price to pay when you try to escape.
Oh yeah.
I remember I interviewed Booker T. Washington's great grandson
I'm
on.
about to say you interviewed Booker T. Washington. I
Hmm?
don't think so. I thought you were about to say you
No,
interviewed
no, no,
Booker
no.
T. Washington. Okay, go ahead.
And I read his book, Up from Slavery,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and his views are actually very traditional conservative views. But of course, he was portrayed as some sort of an Uncle Tom, when in fact, had blacks followed his example of industry and entrepreneurship, as he said in his book, put down your buckets where they are. That was an expression of his, meaning that if you have certain skills, as many blacks did, even when they were slaves, they worked on the plantations, they did carpentry, they did farming, take those skills and apply them to entrepreneurship, and you'll get somewhere. He also said that no man who makes himself invaluable in the marketplace will be forever ostracized. Meaning, if you are the greatest basketball player in the world, I don't care if the owner of the team is a member of the KKK. If he wants to make money, he will hire you. If you're the best surgeon in the world and a guy in the KKK has a child that desperately needs surgery to survive, and you're the only one who can do that type of surgery, like Ben Carson did those
Yes.
surgeries, he's going to forget about his racism because he needs something done that is existential. And so I always tell people, especially when they bring up Jackie Robinson and the Dodgers, I said, do you really think Walter O'Malley brought in Jackie Robinson because he had some kind of love for black people? No, he was a businessman, and he
Yeah.
knew that Jackie Robinson would put backsides in the seats at the ball games and make money for the team. And also, when you have a championship team, the team makes more profit naturally. And so,
Yeah.
this is
That's
the
how that
type of
works.
thing that should have been taught. And hopefully, in you representing Vivek in his campaign, these are the type of things he'll discuss. Now, let's get to Don Lemon. Because I actually,
Well, before we get to Don Lemon, allow me to just kind of add to what it is that you were just saying, because I too believe that our gifts will make room for us, or our talent will create an opportunity for us. Another way of saying it is our trade, right? Vivek talks about it all the time, is that, I mean, he is a very accomplished man. He has a molecular biology degree from Harvard, where he graduated summa cum laude. And then he went on to get a Yale degree, a law degree from Yale, graduating at the top of his class. He has five different drugs that have been FDA approved, ranging a broad range of cures that they provide. A very accomplished man, and yet he often says that his way of making that his path through life should not be the only path, right? And so he talks about trade schools and making that a reality again, right? Abolishing the Department of Education. That's $83 billion of money that every year that can be reallocated to other things. One of the things Vivek talks about quite often is taking just 25% of that $83 billion and putting 3 armed security guards in every single public school in America. That is a surefire way of making sure we never have another gun violence at our gun shooting at our schools. And so those are some of the things that he talks about. Now, when you talked about, Booker T. Washington up from slavery, as well as I have over here on my shelf another book by W.B. Du Bois, where he too talks about this two-ness of souls, right? So the two of them, Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, they were mortal enemies when they were alive, just 40 years removed from the proclamation of emancipation, or Emancipation Proclamation, just 40 years removed from that. Here you have these two great men in the South, debating and trying to have open discussions at a very, I can only imagine, kind of hot potato kind of time that they were living in, and yet they were warring on the two-ness of the soul of Black people in America, and having that very rigorous conversation, which again is something we don't talk a lot about, and it kind of springboards right into the conversation about Don Lemon.
Yeah, well, that was my first time looking at Vevey. I had never really paid attention, and of course, Don Lemon, pulled out the usual race nonsense, as if,
Yep.
first of all, Vevey has very dark skin, and he's obviously not a typical Caucasian man, although I think technically Indians may be considered to be Caucasian, but clearly he has brown skin. And there is Don Lemon basically saying that he has no right to an opinion because
Yeah,
he is not, quote unquote.
because he's not Black.
I mean,
Yeah. And yet again, I mean, just going back to the two books that we were just talking about, with or the two, just I don't know, just mountains of men. When you're looking at Du Bois, and when you're looking at Booker T. Washington, again, they were 40 years removed from slavery. And yet they were formidable, and they lifted up the Black community, and they were out here having very rigorous conversations about their two warring ideas about how the Black community should progress, should proceed beyond slavery. And they were very, and I mean, and these were not very, kumbaya kind of conversations, and yet they were having these very, very rigorous conversations in the Black community at an epoch in time where we needed that level of intelligence to come in and to kind of lay out a pathway for Black people. Now, fast forward, right? Because I've never been a slave. Don Lemon never been a slave. We're not 40 years removed from slavery. We're well over 100+ years removed from slavery. And yet here we have Don Lemon. If you close your eyes and just listen to the rhetoric, not only of Lemon, but of many in the Black community, certainly Black Lives Matter, you would think that we too are just 40 years removed from slavery. And there's nothing remotely true about that. And that is what Vivek was holding Don Lemon's feet to the fire. I mean, let's talk about privilege just for a moment. Here you have Don Lemon, a Black man, married to a white man, earning millions of dollars every single year, decrying racism. That sounds like a tremendous amount of privilege to me. That sounds like someone who has been allowed to live his life exactly the way he wanted to live his life, right? So it's disingenuous. And that is what Vivek was highlighting. And he did, and it was a masterclass put on by Vivek of what you do when you walk into the enemy's quote unquote territory, and you walk out with some of that territory under your arm, right? And so that's exactly what we should be doing, is walking into these more liberal leaning spaces, because I believe we have the better values. We have the better ideals on our side. We just have to have the courage to speak it out loud.
well, excuse me for being blunt, but that is what I am, and I can't change. So let me ask you some tougher questions.
Okay.
I liked a lot of things that Donald Trump said when he was running for president. However, once he became president, he adopted the policies of all the people that he said he was against.
Yeah.
For example, he talked about getting rid of the swamp. His entire cabinet was a swamp, from Goldman Sachs, Steve Mnuchin, to people going to Bilderberger meetings, to globalists across the board. And Vivek is saying a lot of things that I also agree with. The question is, how do we know that he's going to actually do what he says? And it's one thing I like about Bobby Kennedy, although I disagree with many points he makes. I believe that he at least has integrity. A person of integrity is consistent all the way down the line. A person without integrity changes every moment for convenience. And I saw Donald Trump at his rallies. I went to those rallies not as a fangirl for him, not as a Trump Davidian, but as somebody observing. And I saw that he was throwing meat to the lions. Build that wall, USA, USA. He was just telling people what they wanted to hear. And then he ran up debt like a drunken sailor. And my apologies to the drunken sailors. And where does Vivek stand on the Federal Reserve? Where does he stand on debt? Where does he stand on socialism for Wall Street, bailing out all these corrupt bankers? If you're going to be against welfare, and I am totally against welfare, I'm certainly going to also be against welfare for rich people as well as poor people. You can't have one without the other. All
Very true.
socialism is bad.
And that has certainly been the case. You know, Vivek actually uh, uh, um, compares this, as you said, this welfare for the rich, like manna from on high, like someone turned on the artificial snow and they just been skiing, right? And just making all this money, and you don't want that either. But let me go back to some of your earlier comments when you talked about how do we know if Vivek is going to do what he actually says, and how do we know we can trust him? A point on that. And then you also kind of tied in there Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy as well. You know, Vivek has actually reached out to Mr. Kennedy and asked him to come onto his show, the Vivek Show, to actually have this conversation about the issues that both of them care so deeply about. I think that would be a wonderful idea. I hope Mr. Kennedy takes him up on that offer, because to your point, if nothing else, you will have two men who I don't know Mr. Kennedy, but I do know Vivek. But what I do see of Mr. Kennedy is that he does appear to be a man of integrity. So what I think we will have is at least an honest conversation which you don't get a lot of in mainstream media today. So whether we agree with either side or not, it'll at least be two individuals who appear to have great integrity. I know Vivek does, because I walk alongside him for some time now, and I can assure you he is a man of integrity. But I think that would be a wonderful um, uh, uh, thing to view, those two coming together and debating rigorously their ideas. To the other point that you said, asked, how do we know if we can trust them? You know, when I was running for U.S. Senate here against Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania as a Republican, that question came up a lot. People would say, how do we know we can trust you? How do we know you're not going to go into office and do like the overwhelming majority of these plastic politicians? They say one thing, get in office, suddenly they evolve, right, on the issue that they seem to have had so much conviction for when you cast your vote for them. And my very honest response to them is, that's your job. That is your job as the American people, is to keep elected officials' feet to the fire, right? These are not our friends. Although when you're running for office, you want people to like you. But we have to get serious as well as a voting public. There's a lot on the line right now. We're living in some very bold times. There's never been a time when we've been talking about the type of issues that we're talking about, AI, artificial intelligence, looking at on the precipice of World War III, looking at our friends pivoting over to China and having conversations with China and buddying up with China at this particular time, this open border and just this flood of immigrants. We don't know who these people are. We don't know where they're going. We don't even know if they like us or not. And if you say something about it, they want to call you a xenophobe or a racist or something to that degree and try to shut down conversation. When you look at what's happening with fentanyl and how it's going into every single community in our nation, just like a wave of just a fire, of a wildfire going across our nation, and you see very few of our leaders even tackling it and talking about it. So we have a lot of very big issues. And so I say that to say, now, if ever, if there was a time for the American people to get their head out of the sand and to pay attention and to hold your elected officials' feet to the fire, it is now. And so let's not look at these people that once we put them in office, now we just cross our fingers and hope and pray upon a star that they will do the right things. We need to be in their face. We need to be at their office. We need to be on the phone. We need to hold their feet to the fire like never before. So when someone asks, well, how do we know if we can trust them? One, I believe he has done everything he can possibly do to bring people of high integrity around him. Not these MAGA rats, not these clickbait conservatives who say one thing and then once they win influence with the people, now they monetize it and all of a sudden they don't talk about the issues that really matter. I believe VIVEK is a man of integrity who surrounded himself with other people of integrity. But to the bigger question, it is going to be you, the people, who will hold his feet to the fire. And I believe he will rise to that challenge.
Unfortunately, that's a people who are grossly ignorant. They wouldn't know the Constitution if I smacked them in the face with it. In fact,
When if you don't mind me just
yeah,
kind of interjecting, when I ran for office, just to give some perspective, I spent $1.6 million roughly in my race, 15 months, $1.6 million. Dr. Oz and Dave McCormick, just between the two of them, they spent $60 million. That doesn't include the others who are writing $10 million checks into their account, but just those two tightened because it was a three-way statistical tie for probably the last 6 weeks of that race. Just in that, they spent $60 million to my 1 million. And I almost got a third of the vote. No one got a clear third, but I got a significant number of votes. And so that gives me so much encouragement on where we are. Our people are waking up, and it's not just conservatives, but I got a lot of attention and a lot of support from people across the spectrum, whether within our own party, even within the Democrat Party. I believe people are waking up and people are looking around them and they are moving, right? So that gave me a lot of encouragement because I certainly did not have the money to go buy these people and to go buy their loyalty. So for those who came and voted for me, they did so because they are awake, they are awakening, and they are looking for better leadership. Last thing I say, in those 15 months, I started traveling over 1,500 miles every single week because I didn't have the money to put up big television ads. So I just hit the ground running 1,500 miles every single week across Pennsylvania. And we have some amazing people in our party, in this state, and across the country. Wonderful people. The problem is we have weak leadership. And that is why we need to get someone like Vivek in office. I believe he is strong. He is answering the questions right where we find ourselves today.
when I ran for Congress, or I should say, attempted to, I destroyed my opponents in the debates. You can watch it on YouTube. And the Republican Party said about me He is the most knowledgeable and articulate of all the candidates, but he cannot be controlled. And he talks about the Constitution and the Bible too much. So there you have it. The Constitution and the Bible, which are the underpinnings of the American founding, are verboten now. And that's what you're up against. One of the things I'd love Vivek to speak to Kennedy about is that Kennedy talks a lot about the Constitution, particularly in reference to the COVID shutdowns of the American people and putting small business people into poverty and death in many cases. But Kennedy also spoke against the Second Amendment. And when it comes to the Constitution, it is not a Chinese menu. You can't choose one from column A and one from column B. The Constitution is one whole, and you have to abide by the entire Constitution and not say, oh, I don't like the Second Amendment, but I like the First Amendment, et cetera, et cetera. We need to have that integrity, because integrity is consistency. A consistent person can be predicted in his views without even asking him. Just ask my wife what I think about something. She doesn't have to ask me. She could tell you because she knows me. And she knows that I always believe the same thing. I never change, to the chagrin of many. But we need that now, because we've got to stand strong against evil people. I don't just disagree with these people. They are evil. Anyone that would mutilate children, they are evil. Anyone that would tell children to engage in obscene acts that would make Sodom blush, they are evil. And it says in the Torah, the Jewish Bible, woe unto those who call evil good and good evil. Makes sense?
I agree with you 100%. I mean, we're living in some really is beyond odd. And I agree with you. This is not, they're not looking for a debate on the other side. Vivek often kind of categorized them as those who are pro-America versus those who are anti-American, right? It's not a clear delineated line between Democrat Republicans any longer, because I think most of us see that there is a uniparty that is among us, and some people, and that within that uniparty, it doesn't matter if they're Democrat, Republican, or whatever, they are aligned on a number of issues. So Vivek has this kind of demarcation between instead of Democrat, Republican, is pro-America versus those who are anti-America. And the good thing about it, as he says, and I agree, is that it's more like an 80-20 in our favor, right? If you're watching mainstream media, you think their side is winning, or that they have more people. They don't. They just control a number of the mediums that get information out. So when you look at it that way, this 80-20 pro-America versus not, then, we're not so defeated and deflated. We need to fight. The problem is, kind of going back to how we started off talking about Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, this rigorous debate of ideals. We don't have that any longer. These people are not trying to have a conversation with us. And even if they were trying to have a conversation with us, it's a conversation starter for me when you try to talk about the benefits of chemical castration of little boys, or cutting off the healthy breasts of 15-year-old girls. That's a conversation starter. There is nowhere for you and I to go if that is something that you're espousing, because as you have accurately called out, that's evil. There is no conversation with evil. We're not going to come to a happy medium. And Vivek talks about that as well. The time for kind of locking arms and going kumbaya with one another is over. We're talking about some very black and white, clearly a clear line between what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, what's evil, and what's not. Getting to the Constitution, I love reading the letters between um, uh, uh, Adam, or President Adam, and his wife.
Jefferson.
No, his wife
Oh,
Abigail. He used to write
oh, oh,
letters
oh. Okay.
to her all the time, and so they have some of these letters. And in one of those letters, he said, "Our Constitution is made only for moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for any other kind. It cannot stand," right? So let's look at that. Our Constitution is made for moral and religious people. When you talk about moral, we're talking about people who know the difference between right and wrong, and religious, because how do we know what's right and wrong? Who tells us this is right, this is wrong, except for our faith, right? That begins to make those demarcations, delineating what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's not. And so, again, John Adams said, our Constitution is made only for people. Our Constitution is made only for moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for any other kind. That's where we find ourselves right now. This demoralization of our culture. It is rotten right down to the core in many aspects, especially when you have a Department of Education that is now espousing boys, fully developed boys, to compete with little girls, or say it's okay for a boy in high school to go and take a shower next to a little girl. You know you are not living in a moral and religious country. And as a result, our Constitution is up for grabs. And like I used to say to my students when I was an adjunct professor of corporate finance, is that America does not exist apart from the U.S. Constitution. You destroy the U.S. Constitution, you do this thing that many are calling for, this national divorce, you destroy the Constitution, and as a result, you destroy America.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, in law school, I'm an attorney, and in law school, they don't teach the Constitution. They teach constitutional law, but all they do is have you read the judge's opinions. They don't have
Yeah.
you read the Federalist Papers by John Jay and Hamilton and James Madison, which explains any nuances or ambiguities rather in the constitutions. They just tell you what this liberal judge wrote, and that's why you now have the various, gay marriage, and soon we'll have pedophilia. That's coming also. The UN.
Pedophilia is coming. Pedophilia is coming. You see it already. I mean, we are creating. I'm talking to little girls who started puberty blockers at 11, 13 years old, had their breasts removed. Another girl at 18, she started with the puberty blockers, and then within 6 months, her breasts were removed. Maybe a year later, she had a full hysterectomy. And now both of these two girls that I'm thinking of, they regret their decision, and now they're trying to detransition. But when you look at them, you're not really looking at a little girl any longer, nor are you looking at a little boy. You're looking at something in between. It's not natural, it's not normal, and they are pushing this generation down that road. It is sheer evil. There is no way, there's no other way to say it, and except for we need people. If there was ever a time when people will stand up and just speak truth, I'm not playing these games anymore. I never called a boy a girl. I never used the whatever preferred pronoun that did not correlate with what my eyes knew to be true. So I never played that game, but we're going to have a lot more Americans begin to just stand up and say, I disagree with this. This is foolishness. I'm not playing this game anymore. This is evil. And once we begin to do that, you will see it will catch on like wildfire. And the awesome thing about it that we don't need 50% of the nation to do it. We just need 1 to 3% of people to stand up and say, I'm done playing these games, and as begin to walk according to truth.
Well, the American Revolution was accomplished by only a minority of
It
people.
was 1 to 3%. That's what history tells us. We don't need 50. We don't need 20. We just need 1 to 3% to
How can
stand up.
people get active in Vivek's campaign, and how can they learn more? How can they follow you and follow him?
Yes, we're Vivek and I are both on Twitter. Just go out there and put in his name, VIVEK. That'll get you the rest of the way. And then like him on Twitter. I am Kathy, the number 4 truth, Kathy for Truth. You can go to Vivek's website at vivek2024.com. You can learn all you need to know, and you can begin to engage and sign up and donate. He's even asking people just donate $1. Get engaged, put your pound of flesh in with someone, figure it out quickly rather than later, on who is the better person to champion our values.
Well, Kathy, here we have a white Caucasian Jew and a black Christian, and we better stick together or we're sure going to hang separately.
Yeah, I
So
believe
God
those are
bless
true.
you and everything you do, and your family and everybody in your tribe as well as those in my tribe. And I wish you all the best, and God bless.
Blessings.
Take care.